Okay, this is a case law from company law. The case law is here. It's at the head is X is a public limited company imposes a restriction on the rights of its members to transfer their shares. X is saying, in our words, X is saying nobody, no shareholder can transfer their shares to any other person. So now A is a shareholder. He wanted to transfer his shares to B. Advice. So this is a most frequently asked question as well as previously asked question. Now let's try to understand the problem. First one is facts. So as I mentioned earlier, you need to understand the question first, then you can easily write the facts of a case. First fact, X is a public limited company. And second one, articles of association is nothing but rules, document outlined for all the rest, for all the details of the company, restrictions and other things. So articles of association is there. And A is a shareholder of X. X is saying X actually imposed restrictions on transfer of shares. So in simple terms, X is saying do not transfer any shares to any person, any outside person, or any other person. Now another fact is A is a shareholder of X. He is planning to transfer his shares to B. Now the nature and extent of restrictions imposed by X are not specified. So we don't know the actual reason of why X imposed these restrictions. Now let's move on to issues section. The first issue is uh, X issued some restrictions, right? Whether the restrictions imposed by X are valid under company law or not. That is first issue. Second issue is, can A legally transfer his shares to B despite of having these restrictions? And third issue is, what are the potential remedies available to A if the transfer is obstructed? So these three issues we'll see in this particular problem. Next slide. Relevant laws. Now, obviously, we are dealing with company law. So Companies Act 2013, Articles of Association, and Section 44 of the Companies Act. So Section 44 talks about shares of any company shall be a movable property. That means any person who is having some shares, he can freely transfer his shares to some other person. And Section 58 of the Company Act, this act deals with refusal of registration and appeal against refusal. If the company uh, refuses to transfer any shares of a particular shareholder, this person, shareholder, can use Section 58 to legally approach the court tribunal. Next, application. Now it is very clear. The Articles of Association of X imposed restrictions on share transfers, which may be enforceable if reasonable. So this is a condition here. When there is a reasonable restriction, when there is a reasonable uh, reason is there, then the company may impose restrictions. But if the reason is not very unreasonable, the company act can be challenged. Anyone can challenge the act. Now, let's talk about arguments for A. A is our shareholder here. A absolutely has freedom of transfer. He can transfer his shares to some other person. And the second thing is challenge unreasonable restrictions. A can challenge any unreasonable restrictions because company X imposed some restrictions, right? So A can challenge them. And A can appeal under Section 58 of Companies Act 2013. Now, for arguments for X, what the company, X is the company here. Enforcement of article. A can argue that we have articles of association and there it's mentioned, all this stuff. X can argue that. And protection of interests. X can say that the restrictions, they imposed the restrictions for the protection of company's interests. And finally, the conclusion is A can attempt to transfer his shares to B, but he must comply with the restrictions outlined in the Articles of Association of X. If X refuses to register the transfer, A can appeal the tribunal under Section 58 of the Companies Act. Now, tribunal comes into picture. Tribunal will assess whether the restriction is reasonable or unreasonable. If the restriction is unreasonable, then A can easily transfer his shares to B. That is fine. If that restriction is reasonable, uh, that A person cannot transfer his shares to B. So the judgment or tribunal will take a answer. I mean, tribunal will try to solve this problem, and the person A can seek legal counsel to evaluate the specific restrictions. Thank you.